Hello and welcome to R Lab. Today we're going to be talking about naming and renaming columns in R data frames. The simple function that we use to do this is names, and this tutorial will mainly focus on different ways that you can index data frame columns to more efficiently apply the names to either a whole variety of columns, a specific subset of columns, or one column in particular. We'll also introduce you to a couple of other functions like paste, gsub, and row names that you might find useful as well. Okay, so let's switch over to RStudio and let's create our own data with really messy column names. So here we've got my data, which has got some 3 columns by 3 rows. Let's give it some row names as well, so ant, bee, and cat, for instance. And let's view this data. So this is a very small data set, so it's quite easy just to print this to the console. If we use the names function on my.data, it will output the number of elements that there are columns in a character form. Not only can we output and print the names of our columns of this specific data frame to the console, but we can then assign a new set of characters to each one of those column names. This is probably the command that you stand to use the most. It goes through all the columns, so in our case 3 columns, and renames them characters that are more appropriate. Now in this case we've still left inconsistencies between these column titles. This is so we can then go on and show some different types of indexing and keep changing up the data to converge on something that really is tidy. Sometimes it might be the case that you just want to change one specific column title. And to do this, you can use the names function on the data. And then after you've closed the bracket on the data, you can specify the column number. So here we do that, and we're reassigning it a new name, col.3. So we have what we used previously, the names calling my.data, and we're this time asking it to look at just the 3rd column. If we print this, yes, we've changed this 3rd column, but the rest have stayed the same. In the case where there are many columns, it can be difficult to keep track of what name and therefore attribute a column is and how that relates to the column number. In this case, a call like this becomes difficult because you can't remember which column represents the new name you're wanting to assign to it. To get around this, instead of indexing just a number, you can index its previous name. So here we're calling names of my data, we're indexing to the name of my data that is currently equal to col2, where 2 is spelt out, and we're reassigning this a new character. And if we run the names function, yes, this is starting to look a little bit neater. Sometimes in column names, there can be systematic differences between how different people have labelled the titles of columns. These 2 columns have dashes, whereas this one has a stop. It can be useful to make substitutions of multiple characters for another character, allowing you to make a quick change to all column names. To do this, we can use the gsub function. So here we've got gsub. It takes 3 inputs. The first input is the character of what we're wanting to change. So in this case, dashes. Then it takes, the second input is the character that we want to replace that with. And then finally, it says what character string do you want to make these changes to. And in this case, we pass into it that we want to make the changes to the previous list of characters for our column names and reassign this to names of my data. And yes, we can see that now we have a consistency between our column names, with these dots now appearing where there was previously dashes. And we've done this in just 1 line of code. Before I go on to talk briefly about row names and setting them to a column variable, I just want to mention one of the common errors that can occur when reassigning characters. If R is given smart quotation marks, it will throw an error. All good editing packages for R scripting won't input smart quotations. They'll put in quotation marks that are useful for R. If you're using a strange scripting editor, then it may input smart quotations. Other ways to accidentally get smart quotation marks in your code is if you copy and paste code via Word or directly from the web. So, beware. The last thing I want to mention is the difficulty that can arise from having row names. The general tidy data principle is that row names are bad. This is because this data is hidden away and outside of the main data frame and hasn't got a column associated with it, allowing you to set it as a factor in your forthcoming analysis. So you may ask, if I was given data like this, how might I get around this problem? Well, we can call the row names by using the row names function on our data frame. But this just prints to the console all our row names. We can then take this output and then assign it to a new column within our data frame. So we've got our data frame, my data. We're going to index a column using the $sign. We're going to create a new column called species, and then we're going to assign the row names to that column. So if you now look at the data, it's something looking a bit more like this. You'll notice that in doing this, we've created an extra column, but we haven't removed the row names that we had from before. So let's take a step just to remove that using the null function. And we've now got something that is a neat data set. The final comment I just want to leave you with is that names is a really useful function that can be called in many different ways, but there is inconsistencies as to how different people set row names. Some people use the col names function. There is no problem with using this. It does exactly the same thing. And in fact, it works better in some cases because you can apply col names to matrices as well as data frames. Thank you for listening to this RLabs tutorial video. If you found this useful, you may be interested in our free online Moodle course, or check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel.